You're listening to the _Transformation podcast, your practical guide to business transformation.
Welcome to the _Transformation podcast. This is episode 7. My name's Joe Ailes.
And my name's Jason West.
And together we're the founders of _.
In today's episode, we're talking about governance and decision making. Effective governance is essential to avoid the most destructive forces on any project or program, and those are indecision, delay, reversal, and rework. The old adage that time is money has never been more true than if you've got technology in scope of your transformation. So every day of delay can be all too easily quantified in terms of hard cash terms. So you look at the software subscription fees, the system integrators, resources, your people, the contractors that you've hired. And if you're implementing one of these tier 1 cloud ERP technologies, you can easily have a burn rate of £25,000 a day. And upwards. So if it's a traditional on-premise ERP solution that you're implementing, then that number's significantly more than £25,000 a day. So some delays can be absorbed, others you just end up spending the money. So if you're not making decisions in a timely way, then time is money. But actually more insidious than that is making the wrong decision. So rework. So the best case example, you make a poor decision early on in your design process, and you just have to pay twice. Once to do the work and once to do it again. But the bigger problem is when you only realize that you've made a wrong turn and you need to backtrack late in the day. So either late in the program or actually after you've gone live. And then, a seemingly innocuous decision to take a small amount of scope out. You might save $10,000, $20,000, whatever, on the cost of configuration. But actually trying to make those changes in production can be hundreds of thousands if it's a fundamental data structure or part of the system. So it's really key that you focus on the timeliness and the quality of the decisions. So when we think about that, what are the kind of the top 3, do you reckon, or the top 3 mistakes you can make in setting up your governance structure?
Just the top 3?
Just
wow,
the top
okay,
3.
Yeah, the list could be quite extensive. Responsibility of design, I think, being held way too high up in the organization.
Yeah.
Sort of command control type organizational structure or culture that can lead to the wrong design decisions being made, because ultimately the person at the very top of the organization that's making that design decision doesn't have knowledge or experience of what happens in reality.
Yeah.
And actually, it might make the decision might be, to your point, quite innocuous, but actually it can have quite a profound effect later on. On the other hand, sending it way too low down the organization, where the responsibility gets delegated from what we refer to in our methodology, sort of process owners.
Yeah.
If process owners delegate the accountability of design way further down the organization, then ultimately design decisions might be made purely from an operational perspective rather than a strategic one.
Well, also you can end up with just too much variation.
Yeah.
So when variation costs money. If you've gone too far down, you've got maybe every region or every country
Absolutely.
or even every office having its own unique set
ways of working.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, when you're talking about a global program, delegating responsibility of design to various geographies, various business units, it just brings complexity into your design.
Yeah. The flip side of that, though, is if you have it too high up and you try and go for too much of a global process, all that happens is you just create a huge amount of local workaround and manual work.
Absolutely. The work is not going to be done. The work's not going to disappear. The processes will still be executed in the way in which they're done. Absolutely. So it has to be done. You have to have the accountability for the design has to be placed at the right point in the organization. The third point, I think, is lack of clarity as to when decisions need to be made and ultimately who should be making them. So
Yeah.
if you've got a program team that doesn't have clear process ownership, you're going to try and coalesce a number of individuals across the organization to sort of agree to a set of design decisions. You're going to have a tough time.
Yeah.
Because different people across different geographies will have different perspectives and different views about how things should operate. So anyone embarking in a transformation program, make sure that you've got you appoint process owners, those individuals that ultimately are going to have the accountability for the outcome of whatever it is that you're trying to design, whether it's an implementation of technology, like you talked about in your introduction, or whether it's a change to a business process that ultimately is going to affect the way a number of people, managers, employees, or the function you're transforming operate. You have to establish a community, because the individual that is ultimately accountable shouldn't be the only individual making design decisions. So the design needs to bring together a number of individuals across. They've got different perspectives, but ultimately, the design, whether it's a process, policy, or people, or technology, needs to be signed off and validated by that one individual, that is accountable for the outcome.
Yeah. And when we think about accountability for outcome, it's the efficiency of a process, it's the effectiveness of the process. But one that I find is often quite challenging for process owners is they really need to be accountable for the data that those processes actually produce. They transact all the setup data that systems have around that particular topic, and the transactional data that pushes through them. So as a process owner, you are accountable for the quality of the data, for the processes that you own. And that idea of being a data or an information asset owner is for a lot of organizations quite tricky.
Very different.
Absolutely. And absolutely, there's organizations out there that have got incredibly sophisticated in this area, but for a lot of particularly HR functions, finance functions, this can be quite new and pretty alien. So
one of the clients that we've been working with, we've been emphasizing that point precisely because process owners have got might have an idea that actually the responsibility and around data quality and the data that's transacted through the system is the responsibility of those transacting it.
Yeah.
Or some team in a center that's responsible for data analytics, reporting, and you're absolutely right. Actually, it's neither of those. It's the responsibility of that process owner. I think you're absolutely spot on. It's a really, really important. That's not often thought about.
Yeah.
In when we're designing the role of that process owner, what's the process owner's sort of responsibility in a program?
Yeah. And they also have a real accountability for whether people are using this process.
User acceptance.
Driving
the change through the organization. So
absolutely.
Actually, we may have a change team that's driving those change messages, but actually, the way the change lands in the organization is ultimately the accountability of the process owner.
Absolutely. So process owners being absolutely key. They're going to be looking at system design, process design, policy. How it lands, and they're the person accountable. But they're just kind of one part of the governance model. So when we're thinking through how we're designing this governance model, there's kind of key decisions that you need to have in your mind. So what decisions are we going to make? Whereabouts are they going to be made? Who's accountable? Who's responsible? Who's going to be consulted? Who's going to be informed? As you're working through the program itself, and ultimately, where do those decisions roll up to? You can't really push everything up to the executive steering committee because you'll just grind everything to a halt.
And you won't have time, frankly. And if the exec steercos are worried about getting presented with a minutiae of detail, then there's something wrong in the program.
You might be asked to leave.
Yeah. So we need. There's layers, isn't it? One of the things we talk about a lot is actually governance structure is not there to prevent or block. Governance structures should be there to enable.
Yeah.
they're enablers. They're the vehicles that allow the program to move through its various phases, to get the program through its various sort of key milestones, its critical path. The exec steerco is there. They're the ones ultimately accountable for the execution of the program. Is the program going to achieve the objectives that we set out to achieve? And we talked about this in the previous episode around strategic objectives being really, really important.
Yeah.
And they're the ones they're validating. Is the program still on track to achieve these things that we'd set out? But actually, that's the user experience of what you're trying to achieve, and isn't validated at that level, really. The user experience that you're trying to achieve, and the ultimate sort of, whether it's a system that you're implementing or a technology or any form, target operating model change, the people that need to validate whether this really is going to work in practice are the business representatives.
Yeah.
Are the line managers, the heads of function. They're going to
cost center owners.
Absolutely, they're going to come in and validate whether your design actually, is it even practical. They're going to bring a little bit of sort of common sense to what you're trying to achieve. So having, and we talk about program boards and project boards, etc. Having that cross-functional representation at a table in a formal structure, whereby these guys are validating that, okay, yeah, I agree with what you're trying to achieve, and that absolutely makes sense. And more often they're not actually. They give you little gems, they start opening up cans of worms that you hadn't thought about during your program, don't they? They will come up with the nuance in a particular business unit that actually, if you go and fundamentally change, if you change that, you fundamentally break this element of our business unit that no one sort of really thinks about it from an exec perspective. Yeah. And then actually it's a really important point there. You go, wow, okay, I didn't know about that. Let's take that to the exec and get the exec to provide some steer as to which way they want us to go. Do they want us to go and break that business unit or that particular element of the business? Or do they want us to safeguard it?
You're listening to the Transformation podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the transformation capability specialists. To find out more, visit _group.com.
We talk about program board there for larger organisations. It's not feasible to have broad representation in a program board or a project board because it's just too many people in the room, too many opinions. You just would get mired. So that's where we often split out and create a separate operational steering committee. And their role is very much to sense check, to review, to provide critique, to bring these little gems in that go, oh, hold on, that's not going to work in Germany. Works councils, and really you're designing processes and solutions that are fit for purpose in all the different parts and the complexity of the business. But I've realised we haven't actually talked about the executive steering committee itself.
No.
So as you're setting up your governance structure, it's really key that you have people at the right level on your executive steering committee. We're talking about transforming at least one of HR, finance, procurement, IT, one of the kind of the professional functions in a business or an organisation. You can't make changes in isolation. So the executive steering committee, in my view, always has to have at least the CFO.
Yes.
The chief people officer.
The COO.
COO, absolutely. You need some representation from the P&L side of the business. You've got a CEO of a business unit or an MD of a business unit, at least one.
Yes, yeah.
You've got the CIO. Technology is always going to be...
Technology will always feature,
Yeah, and you potentially you need to have people from the customer side, sort of the sales side of the business as well. But they're really there to help you deliver the program as the person perhaps accountable as the program director or transformation lead, and they will help you unblock situations. But you've got to be really honest with them. So if you're going to your regular, hopefully monthly steering committee meetings. That seems to be a fairly sensible sort of drumbeat.
Common, yeah.
If things are under stress, you've got real challenges, then you need to make them happen more often than every month. If they're happening faster than every month, then it's because there's issues.
Yeah.
And ideally, you don't want to be meeting on a weekly basis, because you tend to end up just spending your life creating slide decks for the exec, and you're just running from one meeting to the next. But having that broad diversity of thought, perspectives, different ways of doing things, having the ability to be able to call on senior people within the organization to get stuff done and to just knock down barriers for you is key.
And you know what? It's and if these individuals don't see that they should be playing a role in the exec steerco, you have to question the fundamental objectives of what the program's trying to achieve, right? Because ultimately you go, well, if it's not important to any of you, why is this program important at all? So it's interesting, because if you're starting if you're creating an exec steerco, and if you're having to convince people to come and join it, you seriously need to think about, well, am I focusing my energy on the right things?
Yeah,
because they should be climbing over walls to get around that table, because ultimately what you're trying to do will impact the way these guys operate.
Yes.
The other mistake there we've seen, you're absolutely right. So keep it tight, keep it relevant. Don't invite the entire exec. Decisions don't get made. Everybody sort of starts. It becomes an absolute sort of political discussion. So keep it relevant. Keep it succinct.
Yeah.
Make sure that the exec steerco members understand their role.
Yes.
In and around that table, they're there to help unblock issues that your program's faced with.
Yeah.
Absolutely, they should be challenging. If you've come up with a design decision that's come through your project board, through your operating steerco, and gets to the exec, and the exec fundamentally disagree with it, they absolutely have the right to challenge it and say, well, no, I'm not happy with that. Go back down through your governance structure and start again. Hopefully, no program will ever experience this. But they are there to make sure that the program ultimately achieves the strategic objectives that it set out to achieve. So when you're starting your exec steerco, make sure that you describe what your destination is.
Yes, absolutely.
So that everybody around the table understands what the program's trying to achieve, and make sure that they agree. Because ultimately, the exec steerco needs to be initiated right at the beginning.
Yes. Yeah.
So that you will have changes in the exec steerco, because there's changes of casting, but make sure that you keep to this sort of succinct group. And if you've got new members of joining the exec, new CFO or new CHRO or CIO, make sure that you spend the time educating that individual on where the programs come from, what it was trying to achieve, and really important to make sure that they understand their role as an exec steerco member.
Yes.
They're not an exec in the program.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I think it's a bit old-fashioned, but having written terms of reference for each of the points in your governance structure is really helpful.
Yeah.
These are the thresholds where we're going to, if we can't resolve things at this level, then they need to be passed to the next level. Here are the decisions that we'll be making at the various levels. And having that, just laid out up front just helps the people making the decisions, but also helps the people on the program that are navigating their way through this really complex set of changes that they're trying to make. Now, the one area we haven't actually touched on, we've talked about the exec steering committee right at the top. We've talked about the operational steering committee kind of at the mid-level. Yeah. We've talked about process owners, more at the at the coalface, making those kind of key decisions. But often, you can have conflict between the individual process owners. I don't mean conflict, personally, but there's competing design priorities, and decisions need to be made and mediated between one process area and another. So it's often really useful to have a design authority. Not really useful; it's kind of essential to have a design authority that's sat above the process owners. Anything that's produced as a solution needs to ultimately go through an operational steering committee, if you have one, and ultimately up through an exec steering committee. But actually really thinking through having an effective design authority and who sits on that authority, who chairs it, how and what decisions are they being made. But it's probably what have you found works?
Yeah,
in terms
I think that's a really important point, because actually the danger that you have when you've got process owners being accountable for the outcome and being accountable for the design. Actually, no process sits in its absolute isolation, right? So I mean, having if a process owner wants to make a fundamental decision to, I don't know, a process in their area, a resourcing process, in some occasions, the reward process has something to say about the resourcing process.
Yeah.
Okay. So whether it's benchmarking, pay, or pay bands, etc., etc., there's an interdependency between two process owners, and actually having an effective design authority that brings these process owners together to make a set of sensible design decisions in their process area, they get validated in other by other process owners, is really, really important.
And in fact, there was an example just recently. You can have payroll sat in finance, so you're perhaps making changes or implementing a new payroll system. And actually, the way you onboard new employees has a fundamental impact on if you're going to pay that person accurately.
That's right.
And it's not just within one function. Especially if you're, any change that you're making to any part of a system or process has these ripples through the organization that, at the outset might not be completely obvious. And they're quite difficult to unpack. And, having a design authority that has not just people from your function and, IT, because generally you're making changes to systems, they're the kind of the obvious ones. But, you've got all, the other areas, you've got procurement, you've got finance. Again, you've got to limit the number of people in there because it's got to be a really sharp decision-making body, but also you can't leave out bits of the organisation. So having that broad view is key, but it doesn't get overly bogged down in sort of a decision by committee.
That's right, and absolutely, this group of people, they are brought together to validate a set of design decisions and their impact across the organisation. Yeah. So you have to have the trusted individual from the exec, actually. The exec may well turn around and say, actually, you know what, if you put Joe Blogs, poor Joe Blogs, gets put everywhere. If you put Joe Blogs into this team to validate that design, I'll feel comfortable that the right people are validating what you're trying to do.
Yeah. So I think the final piece that we'll just touch on today is scope. It's one of the most important decisions that you make. What are we bringing into scope? What are we taking out of scope? And what changes are we going to make as we progress through the program? And some of the biggest issues that we've seen on programs that have really got into trouble, and these tend to be ones where we've gone in after it's gone live, is really around the decisions that they made to frankly eject scope.
Yeah.
And when you've got these really high burn rates on projects, $25,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a day, euros a day, whatever the number is, that people just kind of stare at the that go live date and at that pot of money that's just getting lower and lower and lower, and it can be all too easy to just go, we've just got to hit the date, we've got to get this thing out there, and scope gets bailed out of the program at a rate of knots, and if you don't have that really strong governance from process owners who feel personally accountable for delivering the benefits that have been promised. Likewise, the program manager, the program director, the transformation lead aren't feeling personally accountable for those business case benefits that were promised to the exec. And if the exec aren't across enough of the detail, that when they're signing off, take that out of scope to meet the date, or they're putting too much pressure on the program to hit a date without really understanding what the real impact is on what the ultimate the benefit that's going to get delivered. That's when you can get into some really big problems.
Yes, yeah. And actually, we talked about this again in previous episodes. You create a case for change. You define a vision of where you want to get to. You describe what are your key outcomes from whatever transformation you're trying to execute, and make sure that your scope is always aligned to that. Because ultimately, if you take things out of scope, something's got to give.
Yeah.
The other point, actually, scope creep is another one, because actually, if you've got a vehicle that's generated a lot of enthusiasm in the organization, that's going to provide some change, it's very easy for people to jump on the bandwagon and go, do you know what? Wouldn't it be great if your program could also deliver this and deliver that? And there is a danger that sometimes the sponsor sees this as an opportunity to win buy-in, because the program's so important to everybody. Let's try and achieve all things for everybody, and actually you end up achieving nothing.
Yes, yeah.
So make sure that you don't that you're managing scope creep, but more importantly, actually make sure that you really not taking things out of scope that ultimately affect your business case and the outcomes you're trying to achieve from your transformation. The sponsor needs to be all over this, right? Yeah. This is not a decision. The program may come up with challenges around, we're struggling for resources, we're struggling for time, we're struggling for availability of key people. We're not making design decisions as quickly as we'd like, so therefore we're creating bottlenecks in our program. The sponsor has a role here to help unlock a lot of this and to make sure that the program stays honest to what it's trying to achieve.
So, key takeaways for this week. Governance, it's really important.
It's so important.
Make sure you've got a multifunctional exec steering committee that's got good representation from the business, and they are engaged and across enough of the detail that they're going to be effective in holding the program to account for delivering the outcomes that have been promised in the business case.
Yeah.
If you're a large complex organization, really think about using an operational steering committee to actually help push decisions through or validate things that are this is going to work in this area of this country. Got an empowered design authority that can really help you unlock challenges, issues between different process areas, and that you've got process owners that are absolutely accountable and feel accountable for delivering the best possible outcome from the processes and the policies and the systems that they have under their control. Get all that stuff right, and you'll have an effective program, but be really careful about scope and taking things in and out of scope, and make really carefully defined decisions about how you go about doing that.
Thanks, Jason. So next week we'll be looking at methodology and approach. Thanks very much for listening.
This podcast was brought to you by Underscore, the transformation capability specialists. To find out more, visit underscore-group.com. You can subscribe to the feed via your favorite podcasting app. You can contribute to the conversation via our WhatsApp group. And if you would like to feature in a future recording, contact us on social media to find out more.